Joining me on the program now, part of the team at the Theology Department of Otago University, Lynne Taylor. Lynne, kia ora, thanks for joining us today.
Kia ora, thank you so much for having me.
Firstly, just wanting to acknowledge your own loss recently. Your mum passed away. Now, we know that this is going to happen to all of us. Still very difficult, though.
It is difficult. Yeah, my mum was 91 and had lived a good life and had been unwell for some time. So, no surprise that she died, but grief, it affects us all, even when we expect our loved one to pass.
With grief, I suppose, and perhaps this is an occupational hazard, doing the work that you do and having an understanding of theology. You think, okay, I know how this works for other people, but some of that theory, when we have to put it into practice, it's not so easy.
Yeah, and some of the theory that's been picked up on, particularly in popular culture, isn't necessarily the most helpful theory that we can be working with.
Mm-hmm.
So the classic example is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief.
Yep.
The theory goes that we go through these stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, which is kind of this neat little process. That sounds nice, especially when we get to acceptance at the end and live happily ever after. But in reality, people's grief journeys often don't look like that. And even the research itself that devised that process model was actually around the experiences of people who were dying themselves,
Okay.
rather than the experience of grief. So it makes sense in that sort of context. The stages of coming to terms with one's own death, I can see that they'd be really helpful, or perhaps even the facing the untimely death of a child or another loved one. Those processes can make sense. But if we try to kind of place them onto our own experiences of grief, particularly the grief of a loved one who might have been elderly,
Yeah.
they don't really make sense.
Is it a different process, in your opinion, if the death is sudden and unexpected as opposed to at the end of a long illness? Are we talking with a different psychological and spiritual response in each of those cases?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the conditions around the death are so important in people's coping. It's one of the elements that makes a real difference to how well people do cope with the loss, because obviously if it's something that comes completely out of the blue, or if there are unresolved issues in the relationship between people, that obviously makes things a whole lot more difficult as well. And so each grief journey is so unique and individual, and there are frameworks that we can put around and to try to understand that are helpful, but we do need to recognise those very individual and very unique circumstances of each grief and loss.
One of the key differences, I suppose, in the way in which death is approached is whether or not somebody has a faith, whether or not somebody believes that this is it, that death means you just go to sleep and never wake up, or that there is eternal life. That is a bit of a game changer. What's the spiritual component that faith brings to death? Lynne?
Yeah, and there's two parts to that, aren't there, or multiple parts to that,
Yeah.
in terms of the person who is dying or who has died, and then their family looking on, experiencing that loss of them, and wanting the reassurance that person is going to be going to heaven, and
Yep.
we will meet them again, and that there is, which brings a sense of hope, and yeah, just a future hope for people that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And again, that can be a point of real struggle for people if their loved one isn't in that place of acknowledging their need of God and their dependence on God, which, can also just complicate that grief in ways that are really difficult.
Yeah.
But isn't it wonderful when we do have that reassurance, and that when we can go into funeral services confident in that sense of that our loved one will be going to heaven and we will see them again.
I'm at that stage of life, Lynn, honestly, where I go to more funerals than I do 21sts. Haven't been invited to a 21st, which wasn't one of my own children, for quite some time now. But actually, there is a stark contrast between the funeral of somebody who lived a life of faith and a celebration of that person's life, and a funeral where there was no faith. It can be quite depressing, actually, to go to an atheist funeral. I mean, the value of that individual still, and the grief still very real and tangible, but a very different way of being able to process and understand that grief.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, the loved one who's died and their family are often, may or may not have talked about what that funeral service is going to look like for
Yeah.
that person. And whoever they are, there's that potential for celebrating a life, for acknowledging that it hasn't all been rosy, and that sometimes even relationships are difficult, and there's been some struggle in that. And I think we need to be honest and not paint the picture of the person who's died as some sort of saint, who, for whom everything was wonderful, because that is then difficult if the family is sitting there going, well, actually, I had some struggles with this person.
Yeah.
So I think there's a need for a degree of honesty in those contexts, that we don't paint pictures that aren't reflective of the person, but that we do acknowledge the good life that they've lived, and our love for them in that. And our hopes for ourselves and for them into the future as well.
I'd like to think that people of faith, that people who have a hope of eternity, are better at this than people who wouldn't describe themselves that way. I'm not sure that's the case, Lynne. I think there's certainly probably as many exceptions as there are people that fit that. But as a faith community, I suppose there's an opportunity for ministry in this space. When people are dealing with grief, when people are confronted with their own mortality, there is a thin space, if you like, to be able to talk about spiritual issues, to be able to offer real comfort rather than just platitudes at this time.
There is, yeah, and that sense of just being alongside and listening, and trying to discern what it is that the person needs and what will be helpful for them in each moment. And those moments, the things that they will need, the things that will be helpful for them, will change over time. And some simple reassurances can be really helpful at particular times, and then at other times they're going to be wanting perhaps a little bit more of a gritty conversation about some of the struggle and the difficulty through it all as well. And the task of the person who's coming alongside to care for them is to be alongside and to listen and to discern and to check in too, in terms of whether what we're offering into that space is actually helpful, or whether it's not helpful for the person in that moment.
And hey, as we said at the beginning, there's different stages. This is a process, and it doesn't necessarily fit into the neat little boxes that it has been described. But being there for somebody, not just on the day of the funeral or even the weeks and months that follow, but anniversaries of, first birthdays after, first Christmas after a loved one has passed. These are all important times to acknowledge and to make sure that we keep connecting.
Definitely, yeah, they're all key moments. Yeah. One of the psychologists who has written quite a lot in this space talks about different tasks of grieving rather than stages, and I think it's quite a helpful framework. And talks about these tasks in terms of accepting the reality of the loss and processing the pain of the grief, and then adjusting to the world without the loved one.
Yeah.
And then finding an enduring connection with them. And I say "and then" as I list those things, and there is a sense that there is some sort of process to those, but they're also always weaving in and out of one another. And thinking about those 4 tasks of grieving, I think, is a really helpful way of thinking about our own grief, and also thinking about how we might help others in terms of what is it that they're needing, what is it that they're doing at this time, and for me, I know, thinking about which of those tasks am I most likely to neglect, and then taking the time to sit with that as well.
Thank you for sharing such wonderful wisdom on a difficult topic. And honestly, it is one of those ones, people don't like to talk about it. But if we take more time to think about it, to talk about it, to discuss it together, not in a morbid way, but in a caring way, perhaps we can be better and more supportive of people that hey, all of us will go through this struggle at some point in our life. Lynne, I really appreciate the work that you do with the theology team at Otago University. Thanks for taking the time to share with us today.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.